Mathematics is probably the oldest intellectual discipline to acquire a separate identity of its own. In India too, for instance, it was described as an independent discipline because there is this couplet which goes back to the 7th century or 8th century BC, which says that mathematics is the crest of all sciences.
I joined the Tata Institute as a graduate student in 1979. And even before I joined the Tata Institute, my father, who was a mathematician, had told me that Raghunathan is the person with whom I should work. So it so happened that Raghunathan was away during my first year, but after he came back, I don't know how exactly it happened, but I became his student subsequently. I think this is the experience of many students here. And I have seen over the years, since 1979 in fact, generations of students whom he has inspired, both directly mathematically and also by his attitude to mathematics. This interview was conducted with a view to having younger audiences learn a little bit more about famous mathematicians from India who have contributed greatly to mathematics. So I hope this will be a step in that direction. It is really nice to be able to talk about him and to conduct this interview. This interview will also be conducted by me and by Professor Gadadhar Misra. Professor Raghunathan, I would like to ask you something about your childhood and growing up years and the influences that you had when you were a child or in school. Was there some particular problem or a particular book which you read which got you hooked on to mathematics?
No, in my school days, I had no particular influence which directed me towards mathematics, no, none at all. But what is true is that, I know I grew up in a household we were a fairly rich family. In fact, in the local milieu, we were among the richer people. And there was no particular exposure to mathematics in my early days, even arithmetic. However, my mother was always very keen that I should acquire a lot of knowledge, and she came from her family was more into intellectual activity. My grandfather was a professor of English in the Madras Educational Service, and he was somewhat unusual. He was not merely a teacher, he actually did some original research. He worked on some of Thackeray's originals and so on. So he had acquired a reputation of being a researcher, which is very unusual among college teachers in those days. On my father's side, they were businessmen. My grandfather ran a very successful business in timber, which my father inherited, and he was a partner of the same firm which my grandfather had started along with his brothers and so on. We lived in a big joint family. But as I said, any intellectual influence really came from my mother's side. My father was a very highly intelligent man, but he wasn't into the intellectual activity. He was not keen on reading or something of that kind, but he was a very practical man. He had done a degree in science, physics, BSc, and but he was very good at technical things. When something went wrong with the electricity at home or something, he could fix it. He had that kind of ability, but not very intellectually inclined. But he also respected learning, without question. This applies also to the rest of the family on the paternal side also. But they were not as excited about learning and knowledge as my people on my maternal side.
I have heard that you had learnt quite a bit of Sanskrit in your younger days. Did it have any influence on your
no, it's like I belong to a Brahmin family, and like any Brahmin family of those days, they would encourage people to learn some Sanskrit. And in those days, Sanskrit was available and taught in schools. So from my 6th standard onwards, for instance, I was exposed to some Sanskrit. But I like Sanskrit. The thing is that I like practically everything I was learning at school, whether it is history or geography or science or mathematics. Everything fascinated me, and I had no special choice, but I liked everything because I was recognized as being good at arithmetic. I could do mental sums far more quickly than most of my fellow classmates and people like that. But apart from that, I found all subjects fascinating. History, for instance, fascinated me greatly, and so did science. And so I have no particular attraction to mathematics in my school days, but that came much later. In fact, it came to me only after I joined Tata Institute, practically when I embarked on my career in mathematics. That's when I really got interested in mathematics, not till then. I went to 3 different schools in Chennai. The first was started at the kindergarten, and I was there for the first 6 standards I studied there. It was a school run by a German woman who was married to an Andhra gentleman, a lady by name Ellen Sharma. She was a very pleasant lady. I liked that school. And then I moved to a bigger school. I was there for 3 years. That part of it I did not enjoy as much as the school earlier, but it was okay. I had no complaints really. In fact, in some ways it was good because they didn't bother me. The school gave me no homework, nothing, and that was perfectly acceptable. Not to my mother though. So and they shifted me to another school which enforced better discipline. And also had medium of instruction is English. All the earlier schools were Tamil medium schools, and I shifted to the English medium. But I had learned some English at home, so the shift did not cost me any great difficulty. I entered the new school without any problems, and I studied there for the last 2 years of my school. And I wrote the SSC board exam at the end of my term at that school. And well, one interesting thing that happened to me was the board exam. The last exam was the exam in Sanskrit. I took away the paper with me, didn't give it to the supervisor, and came out. Didn't give it to the invigilator. And as it happened, normally I would have taken a bus and gone home, a school bus and gone home. But that day I had some chore to perform. My mother had given me something to be delivered to a friend who lived nearby. So I had gone there. When I came back, many of my classmates rushed at me and said, "What's happened? Why you have taken away your Sanskrit paper?" Then I looked into the bag which I was carrying, and sure enough, the paper was there. And I submitted it back, gave it back then, and then I had to. I was of course very upset, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I was made to write a letter saying that I did not tamper with the paper, things like that. And the headmaster was a man by name Kurvila Jacob, who in fact was well known in the educational field, and he was very nice to me, and he apparently wrote a letter saying that I was an honest student and things of the kind. The invigilator had to write a letter. It was quite an elaborate process, clearly. And at the end of which I came home. I returned home, and soon enough I forgot all about it. But my parents were very worried about what the results were going to be. I was not unduly bothered, and I was probably not, in some sense, I was not a very sensitive kid. So I was not unduly bothered. So it went on like that. Throughout my school, most of my teachers were good. In fact, I cannot remember a teacher whom I would describe as a bad teacher. It was remarkable that right through I had good teachers. And one teacher whom I remember from school days, especially, is a man by name Charyulu, who taught us physics. And he would come up with questions in the class which were quite intriguing and quite unusual. And of course, it gave me great pleasure because I happened to be one of the people who would answer it early on. One of the first people to get the answers, especially if it was mathematics. He used to say, give us problems both in mathematics and physics, every subject, in fact, every science subject. But in mathematics, I was practically always the first one to come up with the solution, and of course, that pleased me immensely. Nice. And so I enjoyed those things. He was very good.
So in your Sanskrit studies, what did you study by yourself, for example?
No,
I have heard you had read plays by many.
No, actually my scholarship in Sanskrit is not very deep. It's or not very wide either. What I see, beyond, I did study some things beyond what is prescribed in school, in the school textbooks and so on. But what had happened was this: in one of the schools where I spent 3 years, they were not paying too much attention to the children. There was no homework and things of that kind. And in fact, towards the end of that school, I was myself a little worried about my Sanskrit. I thought I had not learned Sanskrit properly and so on. And when I told my parents that, they arranged for a tuition at home. And he was a good man. The tuition teacher who came home was a good man. And soon enough, I picked up whatever was taught at school through him. And then he went on to expose me to a few other things. So I read a couple of plays of Kalidasa, like Shakuntalam. And then I read this book called Champu Ramayana, which is probably not all that well known. It's a mixture of Ramayana in a mixture of prose and poetry. And that enabled me to acquire some vocabulary. And beyond that, these are the things I studied outside school, so to speak. The school itself, they prescribed some cantos of Raghuvamsha, of Kalidasa and things that kind. And some of the things, I still retain some memory of those things, and in fact I can quote shlokas from some of those things. I have a good memory for these things.
Okay. So tell us a little about your undergraduate days or in your Bangalore days also.
Okay. See, when I finished school, when I had done my SSC, when I was those days you entered college after SSC, after 11 standards at school, and I went to Bangalore to study in what they called intermediate in those days. I had to go to Bangalore because I couldn't get admission to the university, in colleges, the University of which were affiliated to the University of Madras. The University of Madras had a rule, a rather peculiar rule, that you can enter the university only if you have crossed the age of 14 and a half. No matter what stage, whether it's intermediate or an undergraduate or a master's degree, to enter it, you need to be 14 and a half. So I was not 14 and a half yet when I finished my 10th SSC. So I had to go elsewhere to study if I wanted to continue in college, and it so happened that Mysore University did not have that regulation those days, and I went to a college in Bangalore, the St. Joseph's College in Bangalore. That was okay. It was once again, it was not, I wouldn't call it an unpleasant experience, but it was not exactly exciting. Though even there, I did have good teachers, I must say. I was, in fact, in one sense, I did enjoy myself there a little bit, because what happened was this, that I had along with me a number of classmates who all shared a hostel room, and I used to teach many of them mathematics. Once again, people recognized that I had some ability for mathematics, and these guys didn't pick up things in the class, and I would teach them sometimes, and this I enjoyed thoroughly. Even then, I cannot say I was more excited by mathematics than physics. If anything, in those days, I was probably more fascinated by physics. Though probably I did not recognize it, I was a lot better at mathematics than I was at physics. But I was good at physics too. But all this, I must say, when I say I was good, it was a general perception, both of myself and my teachers, but it was never reflected in my marks. My marks lingered around 70% at best in all the science subjects. For example, I've never ever scored 100% in any paper in mathematics, be it in a test or on an exam. It matters nothing. I've never scored 100% at any time.
Perfect record. Perfect record.
It's a very good record, yes. Always lingered around 70%.
But you were known as for example, who would solve difficult problems or something like that.
No, you see, the point is this. From early on, I could make a clear distinction between being able to understand something and being able to score marks. In fact, even in my early school days, I more or less knew how many marks I would get when I got back from an exam. My mother was always expectant. She always wanted me to perform well and wanted me to come first in class and things that kind. So when I came back, she would expectantly ask me how I had done, and I would declare that I will get such and such mark. I was almost always correct. I never got anything more than which made her doubly disappointed, because she knew that once I had said that, there's no chance of, there's no hope of doing anything better. But anyway, I must say that despite all this, I was convinced, and so were my teachers, that I was a bright kid, that I understood what I was being taught in mathematics. I had never any problem about opinions of teachers about me right through school, even though my marks were never great.
And then you came back to Vivekananda College?
Yeah. To do my undergraduation, I came back to Chennai, because you only needed 14 and a half to enter the class, even though it's in a more advanced stage. And then what happened is this, I was not clear what I wanted to do. I applied for various things. I applied for degrees in physics, chemistry, mathematics, all 3 science subjects. I was more or less decided I will do science. And there are 2 kinds of degrees awarded. I mean, two kinds of undergraduate programs in Madras University in those days. One was called BSc Honours or BA Honours. The other is called plain BSc or BA. It's a little different from what happens in the north. Here, the BA Honours course was a 3-year course, whereas the BA course was only a 2-year course. At the end of 3 years, the BA Honours course, you wrote the same exam as the people who wrote the master's exam. However, you were not awarded the master's degree, you were only given a degree BA Honours. And it's a very peculiar thing, but after 1 year, you can claim an MA degree and they will give it to you, but it always, the degree certificate states MA by efflux of time. That's probably a quaint British practice which was kind of taken over by our universities. And so I entered, and there was always BA Honours, of course, being a 3-year course which covered material which normally takes 4 years, was considered a more more prestigious course, and admission was a little more strict to that. And there was a lot of competition for those things. And when I applied, I couldn't get admission to either physics honours or chemistry honours because there was much more demand for that. Mathematics honours is the only thing to which I could get admission. I'd also applied to the so-called pass courses in physics. They did give me admission to physics pass courses, but I was a bit of a snob. I thought I was far too bright to take a pass course. I should take an honours course. And so I opted for mathematics honours. If I had got physics honours, I would have probably taken it.
I see.
And it probably would have been a mistake. But anyway, I took mathematics honours because of this. And it was available in a college very nearby, this Vivekananda College, which was run by the Ramakrishna Mutt. That's the college I joined, did my mathematics honours there. And once again, I enjoyed myself those classes, and I had good teachers, barring perhaps one. And but these teachers, they knew what they were talking about. They were not very knowledgeable beyond what they were supposed to teach. They were not knowledgeable like that, except possibly 1 or 2 of them. The rest of them were not very knowledgeable, but what they were teaching us, they knew it very, very well. They knew it like the back of their palms, and there's no problem about them. They were all good teachers by and large. My first undergraduate year, I just fooled around like I used to do in earlier classes. In the sense, I was always attentive in class, but I never bothered to do any work at home or of any kind. And fortunately, though some of the teachers in Vivekananda College were somewhat like school teachers, they gave us homework and things like that kind. But I never did any homework, even though we were given homeworks. And fortunately, the teacher did not bother me. He early on discovered that I had fairly good understanding of what he was teaching, and so he didn't bother me afterwards. But rest of them, many of them had to do this homework. Those students who the teachers thought were not strong enough had to do the homework. But I was spared it from the beginning. Anyway, in the first year I didn't take things too seriously. But at the end of the year, I wrote, in the final examination I wrote, in one of the papers, I scored very poor marks. I scored only 40%. But that was not unusual for me. But I realized when writing the paper that there was many things I had not understood. Some questions I couldn't answer because I had not understood this relevant subject. So that was the first time I felt really unhappy that before that I had never this kind of problem. As I said, marks didn't matter to me, but this time the marks mattered because the result of the marks were the result of poor understanding. And during the vacation, I studied hard. The first time I ever studied hard, and then I found the subject, mathematical analysis of the subject, I found extremely enjoyable. And I kept at it, and I found that I was, in that particular subject, I was always heading the class. And I was always one step ahead of the teacher. Even when, as he was teaching, I could follow what he was saying, and I was always very clear about it. And I found that's the most exciting thing in that course. The analysis was the most exciting thing for me, and that was the thing that, well, eventually probably that's what turned me to a career in mathematics. Though even at that stage, I had not made up my mind about pursuing mathematics further. Even though at the undergraduate level I had pursued mathematics, I still had ideas of going back to physics, and I also had this idea maybe I would write the civil service examinations, IAS, and an uncle of mine was in the IAS, so that was one of the role models. He was one of the role models for me, so my mother's brother. And because of that, I was also had at the back of my mind, after I finished honors, I could probably write the civil service examination. That was one of my intentions.
So who told you about Tata Institute then?
Oh well, that came much later. Actually, in some sense, no one told me seriously about Tata Institute. After I finished my mathematics honors, and what to do next was the thing. One of the things I had in mind, of course, was to write the IAS exam. But for the IAS exam, I still had to wait 2 years because I was underage for that. And then I thought maybe I'll pursue. Towards that end, I thought I'll pursue some other MA in some other subject, because we were supposed to write so-called 2 higher papers. So I thought I will pursue some other, take a degree in some other subject. This is another option, and also try to pursue research in either physics or mathematics, or whatever is possible. Physics, if possible, to do a master's in physics, so that I can either use it for the IAS or go towards the research in physics and so on. I mean, I had really no clear idea of what research meant. So it was not the physics. The research was an idea which was vaguely there. Actually, what had happened was this: at one point during my intermediate days, there was some visitor to the class who were asking students what they want to do afterwards. And one of my fellow students said that he wanted to do nuclear physics. That impressed me very much, and I started saying that myself, that I want to do nuclear physics, even though I didn't know what it meant. Anyway, so as I was saying, I was not clear about what I wanted to do. I was not at 19 at that time, so practically very many options were open, especially because mine was a fairly well-to-do family, so there was no pressure that I should start earning or something of that kind. So I had applied to various things. I said a master's in physics at the Madras University. To TIFR I had applied for a master's in politics also at mathematics. This with the idea of writing the IAS. That was the idea. And then I had applied for a bank job, and then I applied for a master's in applied mathematics at Institute of Science, Bengaluru. I got admission to every one of them except the bank job. I didn't make it to the bank job, but all the others were open to me. And then I applied for an interview at TIFR, where I thought I had not performed well at all. But as it turned out, my interviewers thought differently and offered me a position there. And I eventually accepted the TIFR job for a very, what should I say, for a silly reason, if you like. I learned that I was only one of 2 people selected, and this was a boost to my vanity, and that is the reason I took it. Though I had other options, I was not interested in them, and so I took the job, because at that time I had not made up my mind about pursuing mathematics. But anyway, I was not at 19, and I thought, okay, I have plenty of time to decide, I will do that. So I joined CIFR because of that.